Next up is John Farley from the North Carolina Department of Transportation. He is the manager of the GIS unit in Raleigh. He is currently the GIS manager for North Carolina Department of Transportation. Over the last 21 years, Mr. Farley has worked at all levels of government and the private sector. His work spans many fields of GIS to include local government, transportation, utilities, environmental, and security. Mr. Farley also continues to advise the federal government on GIS transportation data and data modeling. In 2004, he received his GIS professional certification, and in 2009, he received his Certified Public Manager certification. What he's going to be talking about here is the NCDOT Spot Online application, which is a web-based tool that allows users to define transportation projects in one of 6 modes, either highway, bicycle, pedestrian, public transit, ferry, rail, or aviation. I'll let him show you the rest. Please welcome John Farley.
A lot of technology and something's down the finger. As mentioned, I'm going to talk about Spot Online, which is the application we built that enables our prioritization process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about NCDOT to give you some idea of the scale we're talking about. Our Strategic Transportation Investments, STI, that's the public name for our prioritization process. And I'll refer to it in the presentation as P1, P2, P3, prioritization 1, 2, and 3. It's done every 2 years. And we've been progressively evolving the software and the approach that we're taking in doing the prioritization. I'll give you a little overview on the application. I have static shots of the app. It's not live, but hopefully you'll get a flavor for it and talk to you about what we're doing next, because as I mentioned, this is an every 2-year cycle now. So within North Carolina DOT, we have 6 modes of transportation. So as you can imagine, we have all your typical aviation, highway, public transit, rail. We also have ferries. We're the 2nd largest on the East Coast. Our annual budget's $4.1 billion. As far as the prioritization process I'm going to be talking to you about, it's how we determine how to spend the $15 billion over a 10-year span. So we're looking at a 10-year horizon and how these funds will go into transportation. And in doing the prioritization, we work with a lot of local agencies, local jurisdictions, planning organizations, and then the field offices. North Carolina is split into 14 different division offices within DOT. So the North Carolina, and we were actually one of the first in the country to do this, and we're getting, we get a lot of questions on a regular basis now. We changed how we prioritize our projects a few years ago, and it became the law of the land. It was actually one of the, it was started with the Purdue administration and then carried through into the Corporate administration and became law. And basically it takes the attempt, which I'd be cynical as the next person, but I do believe it's taken a lot of the politics out of project prioritization. In other words, in the past, we would develop a lot of analysis and give it to this room full of people behind a closed door that would determine what's going to get funded. Now it's scored, and those are published, and it's based on those scores. I'll show you here in a second. We have a map and then a report that goes, and then that feeds the actual STIP of things. STIP is the Strategic Transportation Initiative Program. So actually what gets funded. So as I mentioned, the slide says this has been a major departure. Now, the idea came, implementing the idea, like a lot of things, was a little bit more challenging. And we just finished the 3rd prioritization, actually late last year, and we started the 4th prioritization cycle. As I mentioned, things are progressively getting more and more automated. Okay. So I already said we P1 was completed in 2010 and 2012. We did the 2nd prioritization, and that's also when it became the law of the land. And then P3 was the first prioritization we did once it became law. The big difference, the big step we took between the second and third cycles was to make it a map-based approach and to automate more of this heavy lifting, if you will, a lot of the analysis. Before then, it was more of a tabular kind of thing, and it was very difficult for people to conceptualize and even do analysis. There's some analysis that could not be done without spatial enablement. So, enter P3 and Spot Online. Spot Online was a tool that we built with ESRI to work with our constituents, the organizations, and the people that have input into how we score, to allow them to not so much spitball, but at least be able to get run projects through and have ideas about it and where it might score and how they might modify those projects and those scores to come back with what they want to propose in their final proposal. And again, to make it to center it around the map. The idea is that these are not necessarily data intensive IT people. It's planners, it's decision makers that have institutional knowledge and background to help make these recommendations, and how do we put it in a way in front of them that they can help make these decisions in a simple manner. And obviously, I may be biased, but I think a map's the best way to do this. And a lot of other people agree too. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, STIs is the public name for this. Spot Online is a tool that enables it. What it basically comes down to is the score. And as I said before, it's not just a room full of people that may or may not know why or how they rate a decision. These projects have a specific score and they're ranked, and what went into the score and how it was scored is all publicly available, open to anybody, any scrutiny that wants to take a look at it, and however deep you want to go with it. And then those are ranked. And so when a project comes up and somebody says, well, why are you doing this? Well, here's why. One of the core pieces of legislation basically took that authority, that responsibility out of from the Transportation Board, which were political, and it's a politically appointed board, and gave it to the Secretary of Transportation based on analytics, based on the analysis. Okay. So, Spot Online, as I mentioned, there's actually 4 components, 3 main components, but there's 4 total components to it. And most of it is pulled together through Spot Online. We built a scoring module. Let me start with the cost module. We built a cost module. Up until a couple of years ago, when we were contemplating a project in North Carolina, there was a guy downtown with a lot of spreadsheets that would calculate the cost, the estimated cost of that project. He's reaching retirement, and there was a lot of nervousness, and we needed to get a lot of scoring information quickly, which is hard to do for one person and a small staff. So we basically did a brain dump and built a service, if you will, for costing projects. A lot of it predicated on spatial information, spatial data, doing things that he had to do with a map and look at, okay, is there another bridge, north of where we're planning on putting this alignment, or south of there? What did that bridge cost us? Calculate that. Now all of that is automated. A lot of that's done through geoprocessing. We have a scoring module, so once all these inputs are gone, they can go in, the algorithms to calculate scoring, and that can be adjusted depending on what kind of emphasis we want to put on traffic safety versus congestion. And then there's a Spot Online tool. This is actually the interface that people go to enter the information, and these modules at the back end are leveraged to generate cost, and then that feeds score. And then there's also a management console for folks to adjust some of the scoring depending on what the emphasis, as I mentioned, is at the time. Also to look at the data if data is data, and sometimes you have good data, and sometimes you have bad data, and you don't realize that until when you're looking at a score to say, okay, this doesn't seem right, something's wrong here, why is it scoring this way? Well, the data is breaking out this wrong. Okay, we need to fix that. Wizard map-centric approach. Again, we had 7 months to build the tool and deploy it and get the input. So there's not a whole lot of time there for training. so we really had to build something that was easy to use and intuitive as much as possible for folks to really start getting into it. We had a couple of sort of seminars and quick training sessions, and then boom, we were off to the races, so to speak. And again, map-centric helps people think that way. If you're going to build a road, let's look at it on a map and draw out where it's going to go and what's around it. So this is a little bit of a high-level diagram of how this works. As I mentioned, here's the cost module that we built and the scoring module. Those feed the geoprocessing, which also fed to the database. Sorry, I'm working backwards. You have the spot online tool for the data entry. So as all of this is fed in, you get results back. You can also export this information and do more deeper analysis and look at it, and you end up finally with the map and the final report of the prioritization. So there's approximately 15 geoprocessing calls, and for those of you familiar with geoprocessing and Python, they're pretty hairy, pretty long. The scoring module, which I already mentioned, and this kind of breaks down into percent of truck volume. So how these things weigh into the score, those things can be adjusted depending on the priorities of the state as a whole. And then the costing. How do you figure out what a project costs? If you're drawing an alignment, what properties it go through? How much, if we acquire the right of way for that property, what is the estimated cost? Is there a bridge involved? What kind of soils that might impact the cost of the project? So here's again another high-level look, more of a flow, creating the project. In creating it, you start with the map and drawing out the project and putting in the parameters that you want. It's costed, it's scored. The project is saved as a draft. You can go back and edit it once you get the score back. If it's we really want this project, or it's scored low, well, if we widen it, which increases safety, the score jumps up. Okay, that might get us a better chance of getting that project funded. And once you save, and then once you have your final scoring, you can submit it to NCDOT and then prioritize. One of the scoring factors for the local jurisdictions, MPOs and RPOs, is they're given so many points, and they can assign those points to those projects. So the local jurisdiction also has input into what they think is important for themselves, not just somebody else making that decision. And they can collaborate and go across boundaries. So if, let's say, if the city of Greensboro does a project that benefits High Point, then High Point can maybe give them some points to help increase the probability of that project happening. Okay. So here's, I'm going to talk a little bit, as I mentioned before, this isn't a lot, obviously it's not live and static, but a little bit about the interface and the application itself. Keeping it simple, you have a nice, pretty uncluttered, clear map. Go ahead, the next one. And the next one. Tables and maps. Keep it simple, keep it clean. And again, when you're deploying something so critical to our business operation and having a lot of different people using it, make it as simple and clear as possible. It's role-based, so obviously depending on where you're from, one of the challenges, and this is where the spatial component, the critical parts of the spatial component is, somebody in Emerald Isle should not be entering information for somebody in Greensboro or their projects, or have access to their projects. So these things are, so the metropolitan planning organizations, rural planning organizations, the divisions, the spot office is the group within DOT is responsible for this whole process. And then the experts for that particular mode of transportation, for example, people in our bike bed unit. So depending on your role, dictates the access you have to the tool and the information in the tool. And so these are just calling out the different roles. Spot having the highest role, and then as projects come in, things are scored and come in. Data can be wrong. I mean, we're talking about the entire state. We maintain 80,000 lane miles of road. There's 100,000 total, give or take, within the state. And so you're going to have errors on the data. Again, there's always that sanity check to say, okay, so we don't think something's, it may check out. It may say, the data's correct. It may not, and then here's where you can go and fix it. So one of the first places you start when you get in the application is where am I from? What area am I assigned to, or that I'm representing when I get into the tool and how I start using this? And what is the information I want to pull out and look at? Because if I'm interested in projects in Central North Carolina, I don't necessarily want to know or care too much about what's going on in the western part of the state. I need what's in my region specifically. So in these screens, we're stepping through the wizard now. So you're defining what kind of project it is that we're talking about. So you have the different modes, which are kind of self-explanatory, and then you have what's on a statewide, regional, or more local level, and the funding buckets are broken down by these levels. Okay. Then you can determine what kind of project it is we're talking about. So again, keeping it simple and getting information in order to do the analysis, you need to constrain to some of these parameters. So it's not just free floating. Why I feel like doing this project. There's specific types of projects, all of which are pretty well defined within the industry now. For the transportation, there's a lot of standards when it comes to engineering and transportation engineering. And so a lot of, we'll put the drop downs, the pick list that we're looking at is drawn directly from those. Okay, once you've determined the project, the type that you're working on, where's it impacting? What's the route, what it is that we're looking at? Okay. We get to my favorite part. So once you're in that area, you put in some of the basic information, you actually go in and you select or draw. And this was a challenge because there's a couple different ways you can do it. But instead of just free drawing a road in there, especially for which you can do, obviously the road doesn't exist, it's a new project you put in there. But if you're doing something to an existing road, which many projects are, widening, an overlay, we don't want you necessarily creating a whole other now record in the database and then have to associate it back to the database of record, if you will. So you can go in and pick segments off of the existing database, as well as drawing in a new feature. Okay, once you've done all of that, it kicks it out to geoprocessing, and a lot of crunching starts happening, scoring starts happening. This is one area we're working on. This can take quite a while. Given that we had 7 months to do this, there wasn't a whole lot of refinement. So a lot of performance was done with adding horsepower as opposed to refining the code itself. Once it's done the initial geoprocessing, then you start adding in some of the things that you're looking at as far as changing. What are the things that you're wanting to do? Again, what we call details. Now you're starting to add more of the details about what it is you're changing. And then you get to I'm sorry, there's another big list. Go ahead. Details. So here's where we're starting to get into more specific. If we're going to widen the road, how are we talking about doing it? And all of these are drawn again from standards within the industry, and so you're selecting out which of those standards you're applying to. So if you're doing a road widening, there's a specific way you do that, and a specific cost that's entailed with that, and specific parameters as far as how it affects its safety. Okay, so you put in all these details, you define where you're going, now it's sending it out to the cost module. Now we're going to generate an estimated cost for this. This is powerful stuff. Like I said, just up until a couple of years ago, it really was a guy downtown with a bunch of spreadsheets, some maps, determining these costs. So a lot of projects were more, I mean, he couldn't do every project, so a lot of it was back on napkin stuff by other people, but when it was a critical project or one of the key projects, it went through this process. Now that we have this module, the service built, we can use it anywhere outside of this online tool, for example. Now just for costing projects in general. Build an interface, now we're just costing projects outside of Spot, just to get an idea of what that would cost. So here, and it does a little bit of a cost breakdown, which right away, utility costs. And then you put in how much money you're looking to contribute. So if this is a project that you have funding, so it's a match, that helps the school, brings your costs down. It also, I believe that not only does it bring the cost down, which helps your score, but the fact that you're contributing money, I think, also helps the score. Okay. And so here's your score, and again, it's sort of a breakdown, so you can look at it and say, okay, this, relatively speaking to some of the other projects we put in, this doesn't look right. Okay, well, maybe we go back and check this, or okay, that seems about right, considering some of the other projects that have been put in. And you can see some of the major parameters that are looked at and how what factors into some of this. Okay. And then you get your summary information. So, in doing all of this, again, starting from going from P1 to P3, we're trying. There's a lot of manual and GIS analysts crunching data, creating data sets, managing data sets, doing one-off cuts of the data. Because we're constantly updating the database, but you have to take a cut of it at a certain point when you're doing this type of analysis. And oftentimes those databases don't necessarily coincide spatially, so you've got to start doing some conflating, all of which is very manual, very intensive. So a lot of the things we're trying to improve upon is to decrease the amount of manual work involved. Use existing data sets live, taking cuts from that point. But in order to do that, you've got to have all of the data integrated. Right now, we're finishing up this year our we call it Road Project. It's implementing roads and highways, roads and highways project. So we will have a common linear reference from across every road in the state, all public and private roads, system, non-system roads. Roads we maintain, the roads in other jurisdictions maintain. And then tying all this data back to that is going to minimize the manual input quite a bit. So, I mean, a lot of this is pretty common sense stuff. You want timely data. One of the things we also want to do is allow our business partners. So if you're an MPO and you enter a project, you want to get a score right away so you can continue to see how this might stack up against other projects you're proposing. If you can only do that once or twice in the cycle, then you're trying to guess at what you think might be the best proposal. So what we're trying to do is do this in a way that it sort of becomes a rolling process where at any time, inside or outside of a prioritization cycle, you can start looking at projects, start getting scores back, and have a time to spitball a lot of different ideas, as opposed to just taking your top ideas and trying to run them from and see what happens. So this is what I was just talking about. Like I said, we're going from project to project to project, and we're down here at P4. What we're trying to do is get out of doing these as projects, going from project to project. There's a lot of cost, there's a lot of resource involved in that. So as part of this project, which we're in right now, we're developing something which we're calling the PX project, which will build out a more robust enterprise system based on what we've done before, so that prioritization becomes an operations and maintenance process within the organization instead of a continuous project every time. Because this gets very expensive. And the idea is if we spend a little bit more money, a little bit on this project, we get more capability because, again, you can start spitballing these things. You can start looking at different projects over year round instead of just have that cycle, just get those cuts as we send data out and get it back in. So, that's it. Any questions? Cool. Oh, is there a public thing I didn't know? Somebody's paying attention. Yeah. No, the public. Well, yes and no. The MPOs and RPOs develop transportation plans for their regions, and we put a lot of emphasis on, and they get bonus points, I guess. It helps the scoring if they use if they're using a project that comes from a plan. So instead of just saying from one year to the next, hey, I'd like to build a road here, it's okay, here is our comprehensive transportation plan for the triad. Here are the things that we want to do in this area over the next 10 years. And so we're going to take those key projects and we're going to propose those and put those in the prioritization process. The development of a comprehensive transportation plan is public input and public direction is key to that whole process. So before, it starts with public hearings on what that jurisdiction, that region wants to do, and that's where the public has input. Once that plan is created and then it starts moving forward, then no, there is no necessarily public input unless you decide to get a little active and talk to your legislator or your division engineer, your state government people, or your local MPR. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Part of what we're envisioning, when this started, we had this huge grand vision of what we'd like to do with prioritization, and then we started with this. So one of the things that we were looking at up here that we're trying to do with the PX project I mentioned, is to do things just like that, is to not only use that to say, okay, here's more accurate cost now, but also help refine the scoring module that we're using. So we find that in actuality, the cost of doing the road widening is 10% higher than we've been estimating for that particular kind of thing, based on more accurate information. It's something of a slippery slope because you can really dream big, and from A to Z, you can have. There's a whole workflow obviously involved, and lots of money obviously involved. So we got to take it in chunks. How much do we want to develop and build out and automate, versus eventually hopefully we'll get to the whole system. And because transparency is the name of the game here, a lot of this is being built with public in mind. One of the things, the end result of all of this is a map. It's on the STI website, or DOT's website. It's an ArcGIS Online. I'm sure go and see ArcGIS Online implementation of all these projects that you can click on, type in your address, say what projects are near me, what did they score, what is the estimated cost. You can use that service in your own viewer. But yes, the plan is to and actually potentially put the cost module out there. People want to start using that as well, getting some ideas of what projects cost. Anything else? Okay, thank you.